General practice funding is rigged in the NHS. Practices based in more affluent areas are getting a higher level of funding. In this video, I want to show you how this has come about and also show you how you can see if your practice is a winner or loser in this rigged system. First off, let's look at this chart from the Health Foundation. So this looks at the nation's life expectancy, but also their healthy life expectancy. How many years are people going to live in good and poor health? And there's a dramatic difference when we go from the poorest areas to the richest areas. So in terms of life expectancy, if you live in a richer area, you can expect to live 8 years longer if you're a woman and 9 years longer if you're a man. And the difference in healthy life expectancy is that if you live in a more affluent area, as a woman, you would expect to live 20 years more without poor health and 18 years as a man more without poor health, which is a dramatic difference just based on where you live. And you might be interested to have a look about your area, and I'll put a link in the description to a calculator which you can put your postcode in, and it will actually show you your healthy life expectancy and your life expectancy. So what has this got to do with general practice funding? So as you can imagine, the more years that you live in ill health, the more healthcare need that you've got. So you'd expect that practices in poorer areas would have a higher level of funding, but this is not the case. And this all comes down to this formula called the Carr-Hill formula that came in place in 2004. So practices get paid on a per patient basis. So let's say if they get £100 per patient, but they don't just give them £100 for every practice. They call it a weighting. So they put this £100 through the formula based on certain characteristics of the practice to give you a figure. Some practices might get a higher figure, some practices might get a lower figure. But the problem with this is that the formula that they use is flawed, and it gives higher weighting for things that actually don't have a representation of what the healthcare need is in that area. So I just want to show you this chart from the Nuffield Trust. And if we look here, you can see along the bottom is the years, and along the left-hand side, we can see the payments per patient that I was talking about. And these have gone through that Carr-Hill formula to give different weightings for the different practices. And here they've split the country into 5 lots of from the poorest to the richest. And as you can see, the 2 lines at the top are actually the practices in the richest areas, and the bottom 2 lines are actually those in the most deprived areas. And so it's been going on for years that those practices in the richest areas are getting more. If you look at an average size practice of about 10,000 patients, you're talking about £150,000 for that practice, which is enough to hire another GP. And you can see this in staffing levels for these practices as well, borne out that those practices in more richer areas, more affluent areas, have a higher number of GPs compared to those in poorer areas. And this is part of the reason, because of this funding imbalance that we have. So let's look at where your practice sits in all of this. So we can go on this website called Fingertips. You can put in your postcode or the practice postcode in this box, and it'll pull up all the practices in that area that you put that postcode in for. Click on your practice and you will see here a demographic score from 1 to 10. And so 1 being the poorest areas and 10 being the most affluent areas. And you can see where you kind of fit and your practice fits on this. And you almost could find another local practice that maybe is just a few miles away that has better funding, is higher up on this chart, more on the 8, 9 and 10s rather than the 1, 2 and 3s. And that practice will have more funding and probably has more GPs available. You may disagree with me, but I feel this is totally unfair. That those with the largest healthcare needs are getting the least amount of funding. That year on year, we are seeing bigger and bigger gaps from the poorest to the richest in our country. Unless more awareness of this problem is known, I don't think anything's going to change. Since 2004, this has been in place. There was a report in 2007 about how flawed it was. And year on year, pretty much ever since, people have been talking about how the formula is rigged, but nothing changes. So the one thing that I think may help is getting the word out, because I know for sure that there's people working in general practice that are not aware of this. I know that people who are working in hospitals will definitely not be aware of this. And unless we speak out, unless we put pressure on MPs, on politicians, then nothing will change. So hopefully you can spread the word of this kind of injustice that exists and the rigged system of general practice funding.